Hello, welcome to our virtual edition of our year-round screening series, Film Independent Presents. I am Jeremy Aguilera-Gaudette with Film Independent, and before we get started, I just want to give a really special shout out to our awesome supporters who make this year-round programming very possible. Thanks to our lead sponsor, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, and our screening partner, Vision Media. I'm really excited about today's conversation. To talk about the film My Father the Mover, and here to talk about it is the director, calling in today from Cape Town. Please welcome Julia Jansch.
Thank you for having me, Jeremy.
Thank you for being here. So let's get right into it. If wondering, we have our members, or a lot are filmmakers in the community. How did you get your start as a documentary filmmaker?
Wow, it was quite a windy road to get there, but got there in the end. I've always had a passion for film. I went to film school actually in the States a very long time ago, 15 years ago at least. And I always wanted to be in film, particularly on a kind of global scale. So I wanted to enter through the US because of just how much is going on there. But as a South African, that was difficult because of visas and all the rest of it. So I took a long way around as an executive at a media company. And I started out in development at Fremantle Media in London, and then found my way to their LA office, and then eventually found my way to Radical Media in New York, and that was an easy transfer because the Interpublic Group or Fremantle had made a majority stake purchase in Radical Media. And it was at Radical where I discovered my love for documentary filmmaking, working directly with Justin Wilkes, who at the time was their president of entertainment. He, of course, now is heading up Imagine Entertainment's East Coast division. But he was and is a documentary savant and total expert in the field, and EP'd and kind of got most of the key projects there off the ground. In development, you kind of are very active until the point where something gets greenlit, and then they hand it over to the real creatives. And while I learned a lot working in development, and one particular documentary at Radical that I loved just being around and working on was the Nina Simone documentary. But of course, like I say, once it's greenlit, then it gets handed to the director and the vision is executed. And I always found that very frustrating because I wanted to be able to really follow through and execute on any ideas or, the vision that one would have as one is creating. And so when I got my green card through Radical, which was very exciting, I started the very scary deep dive into indie waters and started my own production company, Point Pictures. And I've been making my own films since 2015, and My Father the Mover is one of them.
And so jumping now to My Father the Mover, I'm curious, how did you find this story, and when did you realize it was a story that you really wanted to tell?
It's funny because a lot of the films I've done in the past have been films that I've been planning for months and months upon end, and writing scripts and researching stories and all the rest of it. My Father the Mover kind of fell from the sky almost. I had no intention of making My Father the Mover. I had the intention of making a music video and was eagerly looking to be connected with dancers. And I was introduced to Stone, who is the mover in My Father the Mover, because I was introduced to him as a fantastic choreographer who could kind of help me realize the idea for a music video. And we sat down and we started chatting, and I was asking him about how long he's been a dancer for. And then he corrected me, and he kind of laughs because he's got this very contagious laugh. And he said, he's a mover much more than a dancer. So I was immediately intrigued, and I asked him to tell me what he meant by that. And he went down a labyrinth of thoughts and musings around how he uses moves and boom moves, which is the genre of music he loves, and movement to actually access more psychological, spiritual spheres. and spheres that help him break through chains he has and liberate himself. And he particularly loves doing this with kids in his community, because he comes from a township called Kailicha, where there's a lot of, hardship and poverty and gangsterism and abuse. And the kids in his community, in his township, struggle with a lot of these issues. And so he teaches them free dance classes where he uses these boom moves to help them literally jive through the hardship and, in his words, find their superpowers. And so it was in that meeting where I thought, pause on the music video idea. This is far much more interesting and worthy of a story to be told. And as a documentary filmmaker and storyteller at large, I'm always on the lookout for interesting stories. And I'm always on the lookout for interesting narratives alongside just information-driven stories, because you could look at the Movers' work and say, well, that's a great information-driven a piece about a person that exists and a methodology that exists. But I always kind of look for the narrative within. And when I met his daughter and understood that father-daughter dynamic, it was very obvious that this was the next very essential project for me, because I could really tell a very, a narrative story about a father and a daughter, but also communicate the incredible work that Stone does through the film.
So actually leads me to my next point, is that you met Stone first and then met his daughter. And the movie is told through the point of view of the daughter. From the title and then from this point of view of the daughter through the documentary. When did you make that decision? I think that POV decision of any movie, but documentaries too, is one that probably evolves and is very deliberate. When did that happen for you on this?
I love that question, and I haven't heard it phrased in this way before. That when I made the POV decision, because you're absolutely right, we as the audience experience the work of the mover through Alata's eyes, hence the title, My Father the Mover. And I've spoken before about how I decided to tell it through. I decided that Alata would be a key part of the narrative when I met her, which was only when we showed up to shoot at his home. He invited us into his home. And it was not about Alata, and lo and behold, because I even had wardrobe for Stone and I had nothing for Alata. And I arrived and there was Alata, and I said, he said, no, this is my daughter, Alata. And while the camera guys were setting up, I was talking to Alata and I said, how long have you been, or I said, do you dance? And she said, no, she doesn't dance. And then it became very clear to me that Alata was blocked in her own way, and that Stone was a single father in the township, which is very unusual, because usually kids are raised, the men go off and the moms and the grandmothers raise, children in a lot of the cultural worlds here. So I decided there and then, because of Alata's kind of closedness, wouldn't it be interesting to put his own daughter through the program, so to speak? Here's this community dancer that's making small miracles happen in his community, but his own daughter, can she kind of also be privy to his miracle work? But to answer your question, the actual POV, as you said, it was part on shoot, but it was really in the edit where that decision became very concrete. I think I was subconsciously making that decision while we were filming, because I would say, Alata, can, watch your father from here. And, with all documentary making, we like to think that you've just held up a camera and everything's just naturally unfolded that way, but you do have to massage a little bit. And while we were, working together of how she could watch or what she could do, it was really in the choice of shots in the edit where it became a very obvious conscious choice that this was Alata watching the work of her father. And that is when the title came, My Father the Mover.
So much of documentary is made in the editing, is made in the editing room. And I do want to jump. I do want to jump to the editing because, as you talked about, crafting this narrative. But another piece about, every film has its challenges, and I think a unique challenge with a short documentary is keeping it short. um, and I'm wondering, are there longer versions of this? How did you getting it down to, I think, about a 13-minute runtime, I believe. And so what, when you're writing this narrative in the editing bay, what kind of had to go away? What did you decide to keep and craft this story?
It's funny because when people watch the film, the overriding response, when, I've had great responses, and I screened it in New York for a small private group in the very beginning, and people stood up and they clapped, but then everyone said, I didn't want it to end. I didn't want it to end. And people say they feel like they get, and they're like, no, I want more of this film. And I, even as the filmmaker, would say that. But, it's much better to have it that way than to have something that's got stuff that doesn't need to be in there and kind of drags on. Trisha Holmes edited this film. She's fantastic. She edited my film prior to this one. She's editing my next film. I absolutely love her. And I have a wonderful relationship with Trisha because I feel like she can jump inside my head. I actually call her the wizard. Because she, I feel like, has a power to just see all the kind of machines going on upstairs. But we decided that this was a 3-act structure film. And it was about sourcing material that would set up the very intimate relationship between Stone and his daughter, sourcing material that would set up what he does in his community, which entails the dance class and also the talking heads with his students. And then the 3rd act, which is where he would take his philosophy and work and dance and actually take his daughter on that journey and see if that work could transform her in some kind of way. And once we devised that framework, it was very easy to go through all the footage and to kind of piece that narrative together. And I think that what was very helpful, and James Matthais, who heads up Pressure Cooker Studios, who did our music, the scoring of the film, which I absolutely love, was very, very fantastic, in my opinion, in a way that it thread through these 3 chapters. And the music goes from just the pure kind of boom palette, and the drum is the type of music that Stone plays to his dance classes, to all the way to a very kind of spiritual and ethereal, incorporating some of those elements to the very end where, all the revelations and the resolution happens. And I found that, James and Pressure Cooker Studios' music together with Trisha's editing really helped bridge those 3 acts together in a way that we were really taken on a very wonderfully emotive journey.
That's very true, and very effective over the course of 13 minutes. I think another thing about the film is there's a lot of joy in the movie. I thought it was just a really, I don't know, I just felt very joyful watching it, felt very hopeful. I think combined with other events that are happening right now in the U.S., especially, watching the short just sort of came about at a very interesting time. I was sort of wondering, do you have any sort of opinions or cognizant of capturing feelings or moods when you're shooting a documentary? I mean, is it so much going on that it's hard to notice, or are you, during shooting, you're like, oh, this is, I'm also feeling this joy and I want this to carry out through the editing and through the entire process? Or does it realize later when you finished it, you're like, oh, wow, look at what I captured?
I think it is there when you're in the moment making the film, but I think that it can be, supercharged as you go through the creative process. So, like I said in the very beginning, when Stone laughed and told me he was a mover, not a dancer, his being around him and his presence, I mean, he's definitely a mover. And if I were to define a mover, he's got powers to make one move from a state of A to B. And when you're in his presence, that is palpable. And so it was very easy to capture his his conviction and his and the joy of he loves dancing so much. He lives for dancing, and I mean so much that he calls himself a mover, and that, you know, the camera also just makes him come alive. He's quite incredible to watch in action. But I think that just, you know, plain raw footage, you do feel joyful watching that. But I think the choice of assembly and going on the journey, I think there are ways to just make the audience get more and more joyful. And then again, back to Pressure Cooker Studios and James's music. I just think that they elevated the emotion of this film so much with the score. And yeah, it's an incredibly joyful film. And to your point about where the film taking place within the context of what's going on in the world, where we are isolated and isolating, and our movements are hindered, and we can't move because, you know, it's not safe to, and that's not just physical. I mean, people can't move with their businesses, they can't move with, you know, plans. I mean, my favorite thing this year is man plans and COVID laughs, because of all the plans that get cancelled. And yeah, I think that it provides an outlet to a light at the end of this tunnel, because like I've said before, and I think Sheila Nevins said it to me first, actually, after she watched it, after it won Tribeca, or when it won, because she was on the judging panel. But she said, you know, we will dance again and we will move again. And I think that I'm happy this film came out during this time, because it has been a reminder of that reality.
I think, you know, you talk about Stone's very inspiring. And so maybe, and you noticed that right away when you had first spoken with him. So maybe this came out of that first conversations you had with him, but sort of his voiceover that he has towards the end, or just throughout, did that come about just sort of in regular interviews with him? Was it more prepared, or is it just him talking, and that's just how inspiring he naturally is?
We spoke a lot in the first meeting, because I really wanted to get to the grips of what he meant by he's a mover, because the wheels were churning and I was going music video, documentary, music video, documentary. And I just was really, and none of that was recorded, obviously, because that was just us meeting and chatting.
Right.
So to be honest, there were times when we were recording the interview. I interviewed and asked him a question on one of the shoot days where the camera wasn't rolling. And I did say, can you speak again about what you told me about X? And can you speak again? So that made up quite a bit of the voiceover where he's talking to Alata on the journey in the car. But there is a scene where he's sitting with her at a table where he's talking about his tattoo, and how these scissors have cut the strings to remind him that he doesn't have to be chained by anything. That we did record, and that we recorded for a very, very long time, and the sound was perfect on it. So while we've only used a snippet on it in the actual film, we pulled a lot of that speaking to where he's driving with her in the taxi in the car, where he's dancing in the salt pan with the latte and saying, you know, yes, you might be a latte, but there's something inside you that's greater than a latte, and moving is bigger than dancing, and all those wonderful things he said. Yeah, they were a combination of us filming that locked off interview with them at the table, and then a non-camera interview, actually at the same location that I did just before the camera interview.
So I guess, you know, a lot of times people talk about documentaries filmmaking, and they talk about the sort of wonderful surprises that happen, you know, during a moment that they didn't expect. But I also think that people say that, but I also think maybe sometimes they sell themselves short. I mean, there's a lot of work and preparation that goes in to making a documentary film. And like you said, you know, you had to recall back what he had told you originally, and sort of asked him to sort of say it again. So how do you feel about sort of, you know, what you found maybe day of that were surprises based, and then compared with stuff that was, you know, that was very planned? Like, you're still making a movie. You're still, going
Yes.
into the day with a structure.
Yeah, I think that look, my last film, it was all planned. It's like I didn't leave room for anything magical to happen. And while I think that it was a very good film, this is the one before My Father the Mover. I don't think that it has the magic that My Father the Mover had. And I think it's because I was open. I had a plan from meeting him, but I was very open to what might happen within that construct. Um, and because I was open, and if I had gone into Stone's home and I had my shooting schedule where it was just about the class and then these interviews, we actually lost some time on the dance and stuff because we only had planned to shoot at his home that one day. I actually said, well, we'll lose some of that in order to get some of what's happening with the latter. And that was a kind of on the day decision. But then you have the other side where you do need to plan at length and at depth. And, we heavily planned what we were going to do with him teaching Alata and where we would go and where he'd like to take her. And that was very planned. And the post-production process, which took a very, very long time because I had a lot of footage, that was, lots of planning, interrogation, and, same with the music and same with, a lot of other spokes of the wheel. So I do think that there's a kind of a dance you have to do between having a plan, but being open to let the universe just take you in a different direction if need be.
One of the things I noticed as well that I thought was lovely is sort of Stone's teaching and his philosophies, and the way he speaks seems to sort of also be transferring and rubbing off on the kids. I love the kids when he asks them to freestyle dance and then what they feel after, and just their observations are really in tune. So I'm wondering, I guess has everyone seen the finished documentary? And sort of from the kids' point of view, if you heard from them and what their thoughts were seeing themselves on screen and what they got out of watching and being part of this documentary.
No, it was very, very fun because we planned a screening in Cape Town in a big cinema. And not only did the kids come, but all their friends and their parents. And a lot of these kids have never been to a big cinema before. And they just absolutely loved watching themselves on the big screen. And afterwards, Stone got up and danced, and the kids got up and danced, and it was a very wonderful affair. Stone has, since this film, gotten quite a few, before the film, he was very much a kind of behind the scenes choreographer, selling paraffin in the winter. And the film, because it's, when a South African film wins a Tribeca, it's a very big deal here. So, he since has gotten some fantastic gigs and work. And what's great about it is he can now get his students who he choreographers to also be part of that. So for example, he was the lead dancer in a South African musician called Jeremy Loops's music video, and got, choreographed a dance where some of the kids were in the dance. So now he's gone from just doing, free dance classes to help them realize their superpowers to actually helping these kids and these families just bring income in. He's also dedicated to building a school, because he has to kind of pull favors in the local community centers and the local school halls. And that means he can only dance, for example, with his kids on weekends. So he wants to build a dedicated brick and mortar space that he can rent out almost like a social enterprise, but then also continue to do his classes, but on his own schedule. And he's being able to kind of attract donations and funding through this film, which has been great. And I think that he's an absolute miracle worker. And the kids, you can just tell in their energy and their outlook. And yeah, it's amazing to see.
That's wonderful. That's also very happy and joyous news to hear, sort of match the same feeling I get from watching the movie. Thank you, Julia, so much for joining us today. It was really wonderful to talk to you about this film.
Thank you,
Um,
Jeremy.
if you miss it during its Film Independent Presents run, My Father the Mover is premiering on Pluto TV on January 22nd. So please check it out and tell everyone about it. It's definitely very well worth your time to watch this. So thank you again, Julia.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, everyone.